A revocable trust allows you to maintain control over whatever goes into this trust during your lifetime. You can amend the trust, you can revoke the trust. You can put in a living trust, and we'll talk about that. You set up this trust for yourself while you're alive, and then after you die, other people take over and get what you leave behind on this earth. That is how a revocable trust works. If you're watching this on YouTube, we do these sort of natively in a webinar format. People can ask questions. If you're watching this on YouTube, please post your questions. If you're watching this on YouTube, you will see a list of types of trusts. We're going to go over these. These are trusts they range from the living trust to the an AB trust. We'll talk about that. Pet trust, special needs trust, domestic asset protection trust, generation skipping, Clayton, IRA trust, dynasty charitable trusts, and a bunch of other, basically alphabet soup of other types of trust acronyms. Those have to do with tax planning, trusts, and creditor protection. So I'm Jim Cunningham. I'm a partner at Cunningham Legal. I've been a lawyer for over 30 years. I'm a certified specialist in estate planning, trust, and probate law. And I'm a real estate broker, insurance, and securities licensed, and a pilot single engine land instrument rated, although I am not current. So very broad background. This is a disclaimer. This is very important. I'm a lawyer. I'm talking. We're going to go over a lot of information rather quickly at a fairly brisk pace. This is very important. If I say you, if I'm looking and it looks like I'm looking at you, there's no attorney-client relationship. This is very important. This is information only, and you should get legal advice from a real human being, not some AI bot or a video, but you should get it from a real human being. And yes, I am a real human being, and we have human beings that work here at our firm. Well, let's start with the revocable trust, what we call the revocable living trust. I think a lot of people have heard of this, kind of have a general idea of what it is, but I'm going to walk you through just the nomenclature, trustee, what a trustee is and what a grantor is, and also a little bit how this works. So I would say for most of our clients that become estate planning clients of our firm, we're helping them with a revocable living trust. So this is really the cornerstone of modern estate planning. Certainly in California, if you own real estate, you're going to want to be looking at a living trust. Whether you do it or not is a different question, but I would say 99% of the time that is the recommendation. Now, what is a trust? A living trust is like a bucket. So it's obviously a document, but it's a bucket with a handle. And into this bucket, you put your house, your stocks, your bonds, your mutual funds, maybe your rentals. We'll talk about that. Certainly LLC interests that you might have. So if you have a rental inside of an LLC, you would put the shares of that LLC into your living trust. Your IRAs, 401ks, annuities, life insurance, those stay outside of the trust. Those pass by beneficiary designation. So this living trust, while it's yours, you're holding the handle, you're trustee, you're the beneficiary, you're getting the goods, the benes, the Latin word meaning good. You're getting the goods in the trust, and while you're alive, you're holding on to this handle as trustee. When you die or when you become mentally incapacitated or resign, that bucket passes to another person, and that person who's named the successor trustee. So if I have a living trust and I'm holding onto my bucket, and I name my wife as my successor trustee, when I die, she becomes trustee. She's no longer known as successor trustee. She drops that modifier to the term trustee, and she is now simply the trustee. So she's holding onto the bucket. She's administering that the assets in that trust, maybe for herself. It might be for her and our children together. It just depends on how the trust is written. But what this does is it avoids probate, and we'll talk about why that's a good idea. There are some little used strategies. I would say they aren't used enough with estate planning lawyers. A lot of estate planning attorneys are very concerned about avoiding probate and sort of this orderly transfer of wealth. Many estate planning attorneys, and I think it's unfortunate for clients, aren't thinking enough about creditor protection. I know that when my wife and I leave this earth and our children inherit what they're going to inherit, I'm really concerned about that going to a future ex-son-in-law or future ex-daughter-in-law. So there are ways you can write your trust to make sure that the future exes of your kids, if you will, don't necessarily end up with that property. So that's very important. That's something we really pay attention to in our firm. And again, not many firms pay attention to that. A revocable trust, now if it's a single person, when that person dies, A revocable trust becomes irrevocable at that person's death. So the revocable trust becomes irrevocable at the person's death. That means nobody can amend the trust. You cannot, you can't revoke it. You can't amend it. The question is, how do you dissolve it? Right? We're going to talk about that because that's a little bit different than amending or revoking the trust. But it's very important to understand that a living trust can be amended during the person's lifetime. That's one of the hallmarks of a revocable trust. A trust is presumed, if the trust doesn't say if it's revocable or irrevocable under California law, the presumption is that it is revocable. How do you amend a trust? How do you change a trust? You have to do it in the manner provided in the trust. If the trust is not sufficiently specific, then you have to do it according to California law. That's a recent case. So here's kind of an example of a basic sort of estate plan. We have Abel and Baker Smith. They create the Abel and Baker Smith trust dated June 19th, 2025, which is the date we're recording this, which happens to be Juneteenth, which of course is the day that the Emancipation Proclamation was read to the last people who were held in bondage under slavery. And this is a trust that says Abel and Baker Smith are put their assets. Remember this trust bucket we talked about with the handle. Abel and Baker are holding the trust bucket. And into this bucket, they put their house, their stocks, their bonds, their mutual funds, IRAs, 401ks, life insurance, stay outside. When Baker dies, when Baker is the first spouse to die, there is something called trust administration. Now, this is very, very important. These assets will if you're a California resident and community property, these assets acquire a adjusted basis, meaning with a revocable trust, and this is one of the great benefits of a revocable trust, those assets get a full adjusted cost basis. So if Abel and Baker bought their home for $1 million or for $100,000 and it's now worth $1 million, Baker dies, Abel can sell that home for $1 million and not pay capital gains tax. It's very, very important. So that's part of what we're talking about, valuing the assets, removing Baker's name from the property. You might have to record deeds at the county recorder. So there is work to be done. Then Abel inherits everything. Everything's just kind of held in trust for Abel's lifetime until Abel passes away. And then when Abel passes away, again, those assets get another adjusted cost basis. So if that $1 million house went to $1.5 million, the kids could sell that house, or the trustee of Abel's trust could sell that house for $1.5 million and pay no capital gains tax. If you have $10 million in Apple stock that you got for $100,000, same rule. The survivor can sell that stock free of capital gains tax. So this applies to all assets, does not apply to annuities. This is very important. Does not apply to annuities, does not apply to IRAs, 401ks, 403bs, TSAs. When the children inherit, they can inherit outright, meaning Abel and Baker, they pass away, they leave it all to their three children equally. And now that inheritance that the children receive, it is, if they're married under California law, they're separate property. I'm assuming the children live in California, but it can become community property. And this is what I mentioned earlier with when a child inherits, how do you keep that inheritance from potentially becoming community property and subject to a divorce if one of Abel and Baker's children gets divorced after inheriting? Well, what we use is we use something called the Inheritance Protection Trust. So that is a trust where the assets, the inheritance does not go into the child's name individually. It goes into a trust. The child can be the trustee of that trust, and there's some certain safeguards we put in there, but certainly the child could be the trustee of the trust, or if the child's irresponsible or a minor, someone else is trustee of the trust. But my point is, those assets are not just simply stuffed into the pockets of each child. These go into a trust that gives that child a certain degree of creditor protection. And most of our clients want that. Why is probate bad in California? We cover this in other webinars. It's a 16 to 24 month process. It is very expensive. It is 4 to 8% minimum. It can be as high as 100% of the value of the estate. And we'll have an example why. Also, living trusts are fundamentally a private, a confidential process, if you will. It is not disclosed to the world. Certainly the people who are named in the trust or the people who would inherit if there were no trust do have the opportunity to investigate or to see the contents of the trust, but it is not something that is in the public record. It's not something that's filed in the court system. A will is a public record. Anyone can walk up to the window, find out what this will says. You know, if I die and I die with a will-based plan, anyone can see what I'm inheriting. Anyone can see what my kids are inheriting, the dollar amount, when they inherit it, their address, a whole bunch of information. And we live in this, it's a very antiquated system. But in this modern era we live in, I would not want that information in the public domain because it will be there forever. So probate can lead up to 100% of the value of the estate because the probate fees are based on the fair market value of the property. For example, if a person dies with $1 million house with a $950,000 mortgage, the probate fees are about $50,000. It's going to take the equity away. So that was an example of where they could be 100%. So again, here's an example of $1 million estate, 46,000 in fees plus maybe 4,000 in costs. The executor gets 23,000. The attorney gets 23,000 on $1 million estate. So how do living trusts provide peace of mind? A living trust is a legally binding document that clearly outlines your wishes. This is the revocable trust. Knowing that your directives are legally enforceable provides confidence, right, that your intentions will be protected and followed. So when you leave this earth, you leave everything that you have behind, and you are in the United States, you do have the power to leave your property to whomever you want. Okay, so there's no forced inheritance. You don't have to leave it to some to spouses, some to children. It's the way many, in fact, most other countries are. The United States does not follow that example. So this having a written estate plan, having a properly written and funded revocable living trust really reduces or minimizes the possibility of misunderstandings or disputes. Now, if you have a living trust, there can be a dispute, but sometimes there's a dispute because people don't know what mom or dad wanted to do. So having it written down, having it stated, I think can help. Knowing that your affairs are in order gives you peace of mind, right? It gives you control over your future. It gives you agency. You are deciding what happens with your stuff when you're gone and who's in control, and that helps peace of mind. Now, we have an example here of Drew. He has a living trust, and he says, look, half of my estate's going to go to Ellis, who took care of me in my final years. Maybe Drew doesn't have any children. And the other 50%, so 25% each, go to Frankie and Gray. It's very clear. So 50% goes to this person, 25% goes to that person, 25% goes to that person. And this minimizes disputes, because if there is nothing in writing, and Ellis said, well, hey, Frankie and Gray, Drew wanted to give me half and wanted to give you guys quarters, that's something that should be written down for obvious reasons, because Drew's not around to say otherwise. Now, here's what's really cool about a living trust. So let's go with this example of Drew. Drew can change his mind. So you set up a living trust. It's kind of like wet concrete, right? And you can move this concrete around until you die, then it becomes cured, and you can't do anything with it. But while you're alive, you can change it. So Drew's living trust says 50% of my estate goes to Ellis, who's taking care of Drew. But Ellis says, Drew, I'm tired of taking care of you. I'm going to go travel. Drew says, okay, then I'll just leave it equally between you, Frankie, and Gray. Drew can change the estate plan through an amendment or a restatement. An amendment, you heard that, because a revocable trust is amendable. Drew can amend his trust to change the disposition of the assets. It's very important to understand with an irrevocable trust, and this is why we, generally speaking, do not use irrevocable trust for the foundational plan, if you will, sort of the baseline core plan, is most people want to have the ability to change who gets what, is the bottom line. And with a revocable trust, you can do that on your own. If you're the person who created that revocable trust, you can amend or revoke that trust. Now, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which was passed in 2017, that expires at the end of 2025. So we're in 2025, and the president's big, beautiful bill, as it's being called, has not yet passed. And you may be watching this, it might have already passed. You might be watching this at a different time, and it never did pass. I have no idea what's going to happen, because we're recording this on June 19th of 2025. But under current law, that Tax Cuts and Jobs Act is going to sunset, and the federal estate tax exemption is going to get cut from about 14 million. Really, it's 13.99 million. I don't know why the government just didn't round up for 14 million. It drives everyone nuts. It's going to get cut in half. This $7 million exemption is adjusted for inflation, so we're anticipating it to be around 7.2 million if the legislation is not extended. The big, beautiful bill is, as it's called, wants to kick that up to 15 million and index it to inflation. So it sort of sweetens the pot for people with larger estates. What about irrevocable trusts? Again, I mentioned your revocable trust can have some irrevocable surprises. So it's like, it's like Cracker Jacks. You get a secret toy surprise in the pack, but you may not like it. Okay. What is an AB trust? An AB trust is a type of living trust. It is a living trust that married people created quite often before 2011. So before 2011, We had when I started practicing law in the 1990s, the federal estate tax exemption was a puny $600,000, right? $600,000 was the amount that you could leave free of federal estate tax. And then if you had more than 600,000, it was taxed between 37 and 55% of everything over 600,000. Very, very punitive, frankly, tax bill. Certainly with today's numbers, I think people are, broadly speaking, wealthier than they were 30 years ago when I started practicing law. That those numbers, my gosh, I mean, would be very high, would be millions of dollars for many, many people. So an AB trust was a type of revocable trust that was used, that married couples used, so that each married couple had 600,000. But here's the problem. If I'm married and I die and my wife inherits my 600,000 and she already has her 600,000. Now she has 1.2 million. When she dies, she only has a $600,000 exemption, right? So that her 600,000 is taxed at 37 to 55%, and that was 235,000. An AB trust says, when Jim dies, my half of the property goes into a B trust, a bypass trust. And you can also think of this as the buried spouse trust or the below ground spouse trust. So this is how lawyers remember it. The B trust is the buried or below ground spouse trust, which would be me dying, my wife surviving. She's in the A trust. She's the alive spouse. She is the above ground spouse. Here's the deal. The A trust, the survivor's trust, is a revocable trust. It still remains revocable, meaning that when the surviving spouse dies, so that spouse who has the A trust dies, those assets in that A trust get an adjusted cost basis. I mentioned that earlier. So meaning those assets, maybe they were bought them for 200,000 and they're worth 600,000 now. So when the heirs inherit from my wife, who is the beneficiary of the A trust, remember I've already died, the kids get to sell those assets free of tax. The assets that went into the B trust, here's the problem. So I die 10 years later, my wife dies. I'm the first spouse to die. My assets go into the B trust. Those assets may go in at a $600,000 value, but when my wife dies and the kids inherit that $600,000 asset, it's worth $4 million. This is not uncommon. Okay, we see this frequently if there's been maybe 20 years. The kids are going to pay capital gains tax on that difference between $4 million and 600,000. So they're going to have a capital gains tax bill on $3.4 million, which is about $1 million. Okay, that is the fundamental problem with the B trust. Is there's embedded capital gain. So if this is you. If you're thinking, wow, this is, when dad died 20 years ago, I remember mom had one of these AB trusts and their assets in that B trust, those do not get a step up in basis. They don't get an adjusted cost basis. And that can really be very taxing when it comes to finally dissolving both the A and the B trust when mom and dad or your parents pass away. It may not be your mom and dad. It could be step parents. It could be any kind of combination, right? In modern America. But my point is, if you have married people, one died and there's an AB trust and there's a survivor, while that survivor's alive, this is very, very important. While that survivor's alive, there are some steps that you can take to unwind that B trust, okay? There's some steps you can take to make sure that those B trust assets get a step up in basis. It may require a court order, but we do cover that in other webinars. This is a Clayton election trust. So we talked about AB trust. It means on the death of one spouse, the surviving spouse gets half, the buried spouse, the below ground spouse goes into this separate trust. This is a slide. If you're watching this is something called a Clayton election. I would say this is a very sophisticated strategy that when one spouse passes away, people with a larger estate, maybe a couple with a $20 million estate, maybe even a younger couple with a $10 million estate, if they're worried that their assets are going to grow beyond the estate tax exemption, which is currently $14 million, a lot of people look at this, okay? And all this is a slightly more convoluted way of funding or creating this B trust, this bypass trust for federal estate tax purposes, this bypass trust to reduce overall death taxes. I'm not going to get in the weeds on this, but this is something that certainly is out there. A Clayton election trust does involve two irrevocable trusts. One is the marital trust, also known as a Q-tip trust, which we'll talk about, as well as the family trust or bypass trust, the B trust. So we're going to talk a little bit more about these later. So a revocable living trust with no AB provisions avoids probate, allows you to manage assets if you're incapacitated. It's private. I would say this is the foundational document for most estate plans. So what has happened since 2011 is the estate tax exemptions went to 5 million. Now they're at 14 million. Most people don't have a $14 million estate. If you're married, you can double up to 28 million using portability, which we cover in another webinar. It's where you file a document with the federal government after the death of a spouse. It's very important to do, frankly, if you've lost a spouse. But where I'm going with this is this revocable trust avoids probate, helps you manage assets if you're incapacitated. But for the vast majority of people, I think it's 99.9% of people in the United States, having an AB trust to save federal estate tax is no longer necessary. And it comes with this trade-off. To avoid federal estate tax, you end up subjecting some of these assets to capital gains tax. And it's simply, when you do the math, for most people, it's not worth it. AB trust, I would say if you want to control where if you're the first spouse to die and you want to control where those assets ultimately go after your surviving spouse dies, you're going to look at an AB trust. You might look at an AC trust, which you get a step up in basis. All you mean is you don't have the negative capital gains tax issues that you do with the B trust. But I think it's something to look at if you have a larger estate. But for most people who have an AB trust, they don't need it. ABC trust with Clayton election, I would say, would be the preferred method for larger estates. It is very flexible. This has to be in the original trust. You can't add this after somebody dies, by the way. This has to be in the trust document while both people are alive. And this is a very common tool. Again, I think this is something that's beyond the scope of just identifying that the Clayton Trust involves irrevocable trust. That's kind of the point I want to make with this, but we can certainly cover this on another webinar. So trust for specific beneficiaries. Let's talk about pets. We're going to lead with pets, okay? If you have pets, I hope you love your pets. I mean, we've got an old rescue dog. She just keeps living, she's healthy, slowing down. We love her to death. But in California, it used to be that you could only create trust for people. And that would be human beings with heartbeats. Okay, so living people, not dead people, or a charity or a corporation, partnership, or LLC until 2009. So fairly recently, I mean, a little while ago, 15 years ago, 16 years ago, pets can't enforce their rights. And here's kind of the fundamental idea: is that who's going to enforce the right for the pet, right? Well, California said, let's create a structure where we can do that. So here's how a pet trust works. You can say, I'm going to leave assets. You could leave all your assets for your pets. I did have one client do that. Or you could leave 100,000 or 50,000 or whatever it is. When I pass away, in my living trust, there is a sub-trust that is a pet trust. And what happens is we do have this trust administration. You're going to have to go through all the things that you need to go through: settling your affairs, paying your last illness expense, removing your name. Like if this is your trust, removing your name from the trust. And then the money goes into a trust, and that money is used for the pets. Now, Tina here in our example, Owen is the owner. Owen left everything to his dog and cat and Butterfly. And Tina, actually Butterfly is not a beneficiary. It must be a domestic animal. Tina is the trustee. Now, it's Tina's job to use the money to benefit the animals, okay? There is also a beneficiary after the animals, because animals are living creatures, and much like humans, they don't live forever. I guess giant tortoises live for a couple hundred years, but most animals have a shorter lifespan than humans. And so there is typically a human beneficiary, or you could have a charitable beneficiary after the dogs have passed away. There are some mechanisms in there to protect the dogs and the ultimate beneficiary. And the question is like, who can come in and say, hey, well, Tina's embezzling the money and not using, she's just leaving the dogs and cat to run around, and she's really not taking care of them. There's a mechanism to enforce that. So that's a pet trust. All amounts must be used for the benefit of the animal, not the trustee. That's important. Otherwise, it's embezzlement. And at termination of the trust, the leftovers go to the pet trust. So in our example here, Owen's living trust contains a pet trust giving $50,000 to Tina as trustee for her to hold for the care of Rover. Tina must use the $50,000 for Rover's care, and when Rover dies, the leftovers go to Ben. Trusts for loved ones with special needs. So this is very important. We're going to talk about special needs trusts. If this is you or somebody you know that has a loved one with special needs, you know that you might have heard of this special needs trust. Well, what is it? Well, the idea here is people who have needs-based public assistance benefits who cannot own more than $2,000. If this sounds familiar, right? You can't have more than $2,000 in your account at the end of the month. What if you need to leave them money or want to leave them money, whether you're alive or after you pass away? So this is where we have what is called a third party third-party special needs trust. So the beneficiary, this is the loved one with special needs, cannot have direct access to the trust or its money for things like food and shelter. Okay, you can't have direct access, and that money cannot be paid for food or shelter if they're receiving SSI, that's supplemental security income, which is a needs-based public assistance benefits that likely will kick them off of their eligibility. So very important. This can be used for education, medical, dental, hobbies, vacations, personal care and maintenance. It can be used for a lot of things, but it can't be used for food or shelter. Now, the nice thing about a special needs trust, other than a living trust, is this trust maintains the government benefits. So if you have a loved one with special needs and you have a normal living trust, now a living trust can say that when I die, this special needs trust is created inside of the trust. So that trust is not created until the person's death. Or you can create a standalone special needs trust. And that's where your living trust, you create a special needs trust that's current and valid as of today. But that may not receive money from your estate until you die. That could be 20 years from now, right? So you could set it up inside of your living trust where that activates when you die, or you can set up a current trust. The reason people set up a current trust is they either may be making a substantial gift there, they may be making annual gifts, they may be parking money there, but more commonly, other family members want to leave to that loved one with special needs. So if you set up a separate standalone special needs trust, those other loved ones with those other people who care about your loved one with special needs can put money into that trust. So the key differences between a living trust and a special needs trust. A living trust allows you, the grantor, to retain control over your assets during your lifetime. And the primary purpose of the living trust is for estate distribution, for getting money from you to them, right? From you to the people you care about, and avoiding probate. Special needs trust has a different, sort of a different viewpoint. These can be revocable. They can start out revocable. By and large, they're going to be irrevocable. Now, what I mean by revocable is you could set up a trust that says this is a revocable trust, but once more than $19,000 gets put into this trust, it becomes irrevocable. That's because $19,000 is the gift tax exemption amount. So some people put a small amount in, but they don't necessarily want to, pay, file a gift tax return, right? If they're putting in $10,000 a year, this is, but most of these, I would say, from the outset, are irrevocable, just broadly speaking, meaning you cannot amend it, you cannot change it. So you can modify here. Now, here's the other wrinkle on this: you can modify an irrevocable trust with consent of the parties. However, not only you have to get consent of the people who created the trust as well as the beneficiaries. If your beneficiary is not cognitively impaired, that may not be an issue, but if your beneficiary is cognitively impaired, that option may not be available. You might have to go to court. So the special needs trust focuses on maintaining eligibility for government benefits and caring for the loved one with special needs. But the real reason these are created and what makes them different is their focus is on maintaining government eligibility. So let's look at a case study of Abel. Abel is 30 with developmental disability. He's on SSI, supplemental security income, and Medi-Cal. Abel's parents put $600,000 in, so they pass away. They leave $600,000 from their estate to Abel's special needs trust. And this includes proceeds of a life insurance policy and savings. And this is to be managed by a third-party professional trustee. So there are trustees out there whose profession it is to serve as trustee. And then there's a subset of those who really focus on special needs trusts. So with a properly structured special needs trust, this is an irrevocable trust. Abel's $600,000 can be kept in the trust, right? And he preserves his government benefits. Even after Abel's parents are gone, the trustee of the special needs trust can pay for computer, internet, online games, trips to Disneyland, transportation, maybe a personal care attendant, and provide structure to ensure that Abel is properly cared for. You can appoint a care manager or a committee inside of this trust. So you've got some guardrails on there to make sure that if you've got an Abel, that your Abel is protected. So two types of special needs trusts. I want to touch on this briefly. I would say there's a first-party special trust and a third-party trust. Most people, if they had their druthers, if they could choose, they would say, well, I want a third-party trust because, first of all, this is funded with assets that aren't the the loved one with special needs. It's not that person's assets. These are assets. Third party trust is from those assets come from third parties, parents, friends, aunts and uncles, grandparents, siblings, whatever it is. This is very important because there is no reimbursement to the state. There's no reimbursement for Medi-Cal benefits. There's no reimbursement with a third-party trust. With a first-party trust, and this is fairly recent, that's where you may have, in our example, Able, that we saw this a lot with the PG&E settlements. A lot of people suffered an injury, and they are on SSI. They're on disability. They suffered an injury related, whether it's property damage or personal injury to the fires in Northern California, and get a check for $100,000, that's going to kick you off of your public assistance benefits. So what you can do is have a friend or family member create a first party special needs trust and then put the money in there. So the problem is that whatever is left in that trust is available to pay back to the state. So if you have a first party and a third party, you're going to want to spend that money out of the first party special needs trust probably first. So I just want to cover the difference between a first and a third party. So pet trust, the beneficiary is going to be a pet. That's going to be the first beneficiary. And a special needs trust, it will be a loved one with disabilities. And this pet trust is a highly specific trust just for the care of animals. A special needs trust is critical, I think, for beneficiaries with special needs, certainly people who are on supplemental security income. And if you're watching this on YouTube, we've got some notes on that. So this brings us to the end of our materials here. We have offices throughout Northern and Southern California. If you're watching this on YouTube, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we will open it up for questions. If you're watching this on YouTube, just if you've made it this far, keep watching. Another video is going to roll right after this one. And if you would like to see the questions, by the way, if you have questions, post them on the YouTube Q&A. But if you would like to hear these live, come to one of our webinars. You can sign up on our YouTube page, you can sign up on our webpage, and the link will be in the materials. So thanks for joining us.